Welcome aboard the Athletics Can't Wait Jets podcast, your nonstop shop for all things Jets with Tim McMaster, Zach Rosenblatt, and Marissa Dunn.
Can't wait!
Happy New Year, everyone. It's a new year, new hope for the New York Jets, new hope for our podcast because producer extraordinaire and supermom Marissa Dunn is back. Things will definitely be running smoother, and we'll have some bonus sound effects in the background as well. Thanks for all the great Apple reviews of the last month. We read them all in the last episode. That was fun. Keep them coming. We'll throw in some here and there. Yeah, it's been a while since the Jets played last Thursday. We haven't recorded since then, but we'll get into the game a little bit. We'll talk about Dalvin Cook and the team waiving him. We'll talk about Joe Douglas, best free agent signings of his tenure, but we got to start with the return of our producer. Marissa, how is it going?
Yay.
Day 2, you are back.
Day 2. So, when I planned my return, I kind of thought the football season in Cleveland could be winding down. It's thanks to Joe Flacco only ramping up. So I am balancing coming back to work and with my foot over here bouncing Madison and the bouncer. So just trying to manage it all, but I'm so excited to be back and talking to you guys and loving the comments in the chat. And Madison is happy to be here, if you can hear that. She knows there's a lot to talk about, as always, with the Jets. So missed you guys. I'm very grateful for a wonderful maternity leave from The Athletic. It's been the best 6 months being a mom, and I'm just excited to be back and lots to discuss, as always.
Well, we are excited to have you back for sure. I am excited to not screw up the tech stuff going forward.
Tim,
although today I'm still in
great
charge.
Job.
So.
Yeah, Tim, you're like saying that I was taken fully back over. I'm not fully logged in the same way. Like I'm still the training wheels.
Marissa's
are still
just
on.
here to enjoy herself today.
The training wheels are still on, but at least I didn't get my cord stuck in the mic this morning. That was Zach. So my mic is working. Zach's is not. So I'll give myself bonus props for that.
Yeah. Tim and I are
Zach's
falling
mic,
apart, and Marissa's thriving. Yeah.
Yeah. Zach's mic doesn't work. My voice doesn't work. But we will get through this podcast. I will continue to clear my throat as I'm getting over whatever is going around. It is a non-COVID but terrible cold that's going around. So let's get right into it. Let's start with Dalvin Cook, Zach. Obviously, big signing in the offseason, close to training camp. Brought him to training camp. The fans cheered him. There was a big celebration. This guy's going to really help. And then he didn't. And now he's been waived. We'll see if he catches on somewhere else. But this is, I guess, a great example of a free agent signing that just misfired. And at least at this point, we can just put it in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, I mean, this one, it was a very weird signing because it didn't seem like they had a plan for him. He only had one game where he had more than 10 carries, and that was the very first game when Rodgers went down. I think the idea, or at least we thought the idea, was like they would have him and Brees split, and then eventually Brees would take over. But they also all offseason said that Brees would be ready for week 1. So it's not like they were pretending like he wasn't going to be. So I think ultimately they signed him because somebody in particular wanted them to sign him, Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers went down, and then there wasn't really much. They weren't playing with leads, so they weren't running the ball a lot. So maybe that was part of their calculus, because everything they did this offseason was under the assumption they were going to be winning and winning by a lot and stuff like that, which was a crazy thing to even think ahead of time. But I don't know. It never worked out. I mean, he was a pretty good soldier. Like, he was a good teammate. He never pouted. Before the trade deadline, he made it clear he wanted the ball more, and if not, he was okay with going somewhere else. And I think I predicted in my midseason second half predictions that they would eventually mutually part ways. And I think it just made a lot of sense. I don't think, especially now that they're playing Izzy Abanikanda more than him, and he was basically a healthy scratch last week while being active. Writing was on the wall. I'm curious to see how much interest there is in him. I'm sure one of these playoff teams will scoop him up for depth at running back. But yeah, it's a loss. I mean, you gave a guy 1-year deal up to $7 million, $5.8 million guaranteed. I know he waived the last week of his guarantees, but that doesn't really make a huge difference. That's a lot of money for a number 2 running back that you'd never play. I mean, he had 67 carries for the entire season. It was just And after last offseason when Joe Douglas seemed like he couldn't miss, he had quite a few misses this offseason. This isn't the worst one. We're going to get into that, but this was not a good one. And, Dalvin Cook had one of those Jets careers that people are going to forget that he played for the Jets until it's like a trivia question 10 years from now. Because he's one of those classic, they've had a lot of running backs specifically, actually, that running backs that end their careers in New York or at the end of their career when they're winding down, they come to New York. Guys like Le'Veon Bell, LaDainian Tomlinson, Matt Forte, those guys are more productive than Le'Veon Bell wasn't, but those guys are more productive than Dalvin Cook. But yeah, it seems to be this is the place where the great running backs come to get a little money out of the Jets before they go off into the sunset.
Yeah, unfortunately. All right. Well, that brought up the thought of the best and worst of Joe Douglas' signing so far since he's been running the Jets. Did you rank these, or are these just do we just want to go
I came up with some rankings. I didn't dig too deep into it, but I don't think it was that hard to come up with. Just the order for the second half of the top 5 of each side was a little tougher, but
let's do
obviously if you're in the chat, weigh in on these too, because
for sure
we'll see what you guys have to think.
I will say before we get into the top 5s, I do want to say I think this an underrated need, I would say, this offseason is getting a number 2 running back that more fits with this style of what they're trying to do. Whether he's someone who's explosive or he's someone who's good as a blocker or a short yardage back. They need, again, a number 2 back that can contribute. And there's always a lot of running backs in free agency that don't really usually cost much. I'm going to pull it up right now because there's some really intriguing ones they can get. I don't think for very expensive, for much less than they pay for him. There's Devin Singletary on the Texans, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. There's let's see who we got here. J.K. Dobbins, who I think is a friend of Rodgers because they were rehabbing together. A.J. Dillon from the Packers. Antonio Gibson. There's Zach Moss, who had a great year for the Colts. There's a lot of guys you can get for cheaper than $6 million, which I think Dalvin Cook was one of the 10 highest paid running backs. So, Raheem Mostert's making $2 million and he has 20-something touchdowns. There's no reason to overpay our backup running back, no matter what your situation is.
Yeah, and that you talked about how he's been a good soldier and hasn't complained. Well, he's been paid well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I did notice that he did seem happy even recently. When he'd kind of be laughing and walking around the locker room, all right, well, they're saving me up now. I'm going to be fully ready to go when I go to another team. So,
all right, let's do worst first. I think we should start at number 5 and work up to
start number 5. All right,
Joe Douglas's time.
So
what's number 5?
I keep going back on who I wanted for the 5th because it was close. I ultimately settled on Dalvin Cook, but it was between him and CJ Uzomah for me. We just went over all the Cook stuff. CJ Uzomah, they gave a 3-year, $24 million deal. So I guess you could say that's worse because it's a multi-year deal. And I changed my mind. CJ Uzomah's 5th. Dalvin Cook is honorable mention because CJ wound up just being a blocking tight end who, wasn't even a particularly great blocker. I think he's a teammate that everybody loved and he was a leader in the locker room and all that stuff. But he didn't really make an impact for a tight end they gave a decent amount of money to. And they restructured his contract this last offseason. So when they cut him this offseason, it's going to cut them more. So that was a bad one. And I think fans kind of soured on him after he, in the beginning, he had that personality everybody loved. And then when he wasn't producing, that falls away pretty quick. Number 4, I put Laken Tomlinson. You understood it when they signed him. He was a Pro Bowl guard with San Francisco, knew the system. So I think the logic was there. They just gave him a little too much money, $40 million over 3 years. That's kind of what you have to pay for offensive linemen. You're going to see that. This is kind of the issue when you build your offensive line through free agency, which they're probably going to have to do this offseason. You have to overpay guys that if they're available, there's probably a reason why they're available. I was thinking Nate Solder right before I covered the Giants, they gave him 60-something million, made him the highest paid offensive tackle in the league. But it was just because he was the best available. But the best available offensive lineman isn't always necessarily a Pro Bowl caliber guy. But anyway, Laken, I don't think he's been as bad necessarily as everybody thinks. I don't think he's been good, not worth his contract. And I'm very curious to see if they cut him this offseason. Some great comments in there about Marissa and Madison and the Jets.
Madison is trying to chime in as much as she can. I do keep muting myself a little bit because she's
like, offensive linemen matter. That's what
she's got some really hot takes. So I'm like, you know what, girl, this is our first day back. We got to ease ourselves back in before we start like dropping.
She said, "Why didn't the Jets sign my daddy?"
Yeah, I think that was in there. So
I got number 3. This is before my time, but Ryan Khalil. That was in Joe Douglas's first year or first full year as the GM. And no, never mind. It was 2019. Yeah, 1 year, $8.4 million. He had already been retired. I don't even think he physically was in football shape, but they came and offered him like a boatload of cash, and he was awful and was gone within the year. Number 2, I put Dwayne Brown. 2 years, $22 million contract. I think at the time, I think it made sense. Like maybe this is harsh putting it number 2, but they had to overpay because they didn't really come in with great depth on the offensive line. Mekhi Becton gets hurt. They have to overpay a 37-year-old. I think he was better than he gets credit for before he hurt his shoulder. And then he kind of was dealing with that injury the entire season, and he eventually tapped out. And then this year was an absolute disaster with injuries for him. So it was 2 years, $22 million, and he barely played ultimately. So hard to argue with that. And number 1 was kind of easy. I'm sure everybody can guess it. Allen Lazard is already going to go down as one of the worst signings in team history. 4 years, $44 million, 2 years of it, I think $22 million guaranteed. Like he's just been an absolute disaster in like every possible way. Like, and again, it goes back to what I alluded to with Cook earlier. Like, do you blame Joe Douglas or Aaron Rodgers for this one? But ultimately, the Jets gave him the contract, overpaid him, made him the highest paid receiver this offseason. And it's pretty clear he needs Aaron Rodgers to be productive. And I'm very curious to see what his role looks like next year, or if they just bury him on the depth chart until they can cut him, kind of thing. Because you cannot go into a season relying on him as your number 2. And I don't even know if I'd, be okay with him as my number 3, frankly. So those are the top 5 worst. Others I considered were McCole Hardman, Keelan Cole. I didn't include Corey Davis and Carl Lawson because they both had their moments, but they're like in the middle between bad and good, I would say.
Carl Lawson, some bad luck, obviously. I mean, I think if he doesn't get injured that first year.
Yeah.
All right, let's flip things because we're not a dark, depressing podcast, or we try not to.
Even though people accuse us of that, yeah.
We're going to do the top 5 free agent signings. And there are some good ones here, too, for JD. So same thing. Let's start at number 5 and work our way to the best free agent signing in Joe Douglas's tenure.
Yeah. So number 5, I went George Fant. I don't have the contract they gave him in front of me. It was a 3-year deal. He was okay his first year. He was really, really good his second year at left tackle. He had some injuries the third year. I just think that was just a solid veteran offensive lineman signing. The kind of signing that they kind of have to make this year, I would say. Find a guy like that. Who's like still in his prime, not like a big name necessarily, to at least fill one of these holes they have on their offensive line. Number 4, I put Sheldon Rankins. He was just solid for 2 years next to Quinnen Williams. Number 3, I cheated and put Thomas Morstead and Greg Zuerlein together.
Hey, specialists are people too.
I combined them into one power specialist. But they've just been absolutely dynamite this year. Greg last year. Honestly, without those two, they probably wouldn't even have 6 wins, which is pretty crazy. That just tells you how the season has gone. The punter and the kicker, because Morstead's been pinning offenses down inside the 20 all year, and Greg has missed 1 field goal, I believe, all season. Wow. He's just been absolutely amazing. And the Jets do not have kickers who just do their job that well. So he did miss 1 game with an injury, so he wasn't perfect in that way. But number 2, maybe fans won't like this one, but I had Connor McGovern, number 2. Got 3 solid years of him where he started almost every game. Got hurt this year, started half the year, but didn't pay him a whole lot. So I think that was ultimately a good signing if you just look at what you got out of him. And then DJ Reed, I think, is an easy number 1 as well. He's going to go down as one of the best signings in team history. He's going to get a raise on his next contract. I would hope the Jets extend him before he runs out next year. But, yeah, he was a home run. And I think Robert Saleh honestly deserves some credit for that because Saleh coached him in San Francisco, and I'm sure that's why he was comfortable bringing him here. But, yeah, so there were some good signings. The ones I put that just missed were Morgan Moses, Quentin Jefferson, and Tyler Conklin, who I think were all solid guys for this team.
Some comments in the chat, like Quincy Williams, that was a waiver.
So I should have mentioned I didn't include the waiver claims because
Bryce Huff was an undrafted.
That's kind of Bryce Huff was undrafted. So if we include a waiver claims, then you have to include Quincy and JFM, probably in the 1, 2, 3 range. But that's not quite the same thing as like going, because when you're claiming somebody on waivers, you're not competing with other people to like sign him, and you're not negotiating. You're just getting the guy off waivers, and then you're hoping that it works out. Whereas free agency, you have to do all the work. You have to negotiate. You have to figure out how this guy fits into your system. And there's some that they've done a good job of that with, and some they've done a bad job of it with.
All right, let's go back to I want to touch on the game Thursday night, even though it's been a while at this point. Just big themes from it, not really like getting into the play-by-play or anything. First big theme is the atmosphere, right? You guys were both there, which is neat.
Marissa, it was awesome.
You got together before the game, right, for lunch?
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah,
very good.
Yeah, I love when Zach comes to Cleveland.
Yeah.
Yes, shout out to Town Hall. It was very in the afternoon.
I'll tell a story that kind of ties to Aaron Rodgers in a way. So this place is known for their like bone broth, which is what Rodgers famously has said is what healed him. And I thought it was going to be like a soup type situation. So you like go up and build it up and you type in all this bone broth stuff and all the different kind of food items in it. And then it just comes out in like a little coffee cup, like a little to-go coffee cup. And I'm like waiting for like the bowl to come out. And then I realized that's just how they deliver the bone broth to you. So Marissa's like, you might want to go and get some actual food.
Meanwhile, this is one of my favorite places because they have a lot of gluten-free stuff. So Zach gets this coffee cup full of things, and I have a giant burger and fries. And Zach has his little coffee cup, and I'm about to dive in.
I'm like, I'll give it a try. And then after a couple sips, I'm like, yeah, I need to get some food.
Yeah, but it was a very nice lunch. Yeah, it was a very cool atmosphere for the game. So
yeah, clinching on the line, awesome. Obviously, and the Thursday night and all of it. It looked really cool for that side of things. Obviously, it went all the other way for the Jets,
as it does. Yeah. It was a pretty ugly game for we're not going to recap the game too much because people have moved on with their lives by now. But yeah, the Joe Flacco part of it obviously like makes you sting a little more. I'm sure, at least from the Jets coaches and front office, I would think, but.
I don't want to get in X's and O's, just because my conflict of things. But I will say, for me, one of the coolest things was all of the post-game footage we saw.
Yeah, I was gonna say
online after, and all of the Jets players that were like genuinely just so happy for Joe Flacco. Like that's really cool. That's the side. Obviously the game didn't really mean much for the Jets, but the fact that all of those guys made an effort to go see him and congratulate him and give him a hug, like. That's the kind of thing that I feel like, it's a fun story to see. And that was cool.
And kind of twisting the knife for Jets fans who have suffered.
I didn't want to say that part, but
well, I was going to say CJ Mosley had a funny one to him where he's like, you ever think that you'd have the city of Cleveland chanting your name?
Yeah.
And boy, were they chanting in Baltimore. Yeah.
Yeah, the Browns are on offense. The Browns are on offense, and when Michael's playing jumbo tight end, I'm like, okay, like super zoned in, and it's like loud. I'm like, they're gonna be on a silent cadence because they're like, Flacco, Flacco. I'm like, oh.
By the way, Michael Dunn had a great block in that game. We saw a highlight of that.
He did have a really, really nice block. I think it was towards the end of the game. I think it was on.
Yeah.
Who was it on? Quincy?
I think it was Quincy. Yeah, I can't remember. You sent us the clip. I can't remember who it was.
Yeah,
but I think
it was towards the end of the game. I think it was in like the. I'm not sure. Towards the end of the game, but yeah,
we love it.
It's a blur. Thursday seems like a month ago at this point. So, yeah, it was a fun night.
The big thing I was going to bring up beyond the Flacco stuff, which was cool, and I think a lot of Jets fans appreciate what he did here last year and the year before, and you enjoy seeing guys do well. But from the Jets perspective, just the mistakes, Zach, the 10 penalties on Thursday. I think it was 15 the previous week. They're piling up, and this is the time of year when you're supposed to have things kind of like figured out and buttoned up. And this team is just playing sloppy, messy football when obviously everyone's coming back from the coaching staff, but still it's not what you want to see heading into an off season where, yes, we know there's no playoffs. We know it's been a terrible, disappointing season, but you'd like to see guys at least have some sort of like structure here late.
Yeah. If we had this conversation more soon after the game, I'd probably be more fired up about it right now, but I've had some time to breathe because they were just highly disorganized. They're the most penalized team in the NFL. And they weren't halfway through the season. They were in the bottom half. So that tells you how much they've been penalized over the second half of the season. I think it's something like 26 penalties over the last 2 weeks. And it's pre-snap penalties are a lot of them, which that falls on coaching. Like if it's like a late hit, or if it, like they always say, they're fine with like the ones that involve them, whether it's like a late hit or not like they want them to happen, but like it means they're being aggressive. Like aggressive penalties are okay. But when you're having 12 men on the field, or when you have to burn a timeout because you have 10 men on the field, or you take a delay of game. I think they had a 10 on the field and they took a delay of game, and then Greg Zuerlein had his field goal blocked. They used a timeout in the third quarter early. It just like the coaches did not prepare them properly for this game, and we've seen a lot of sloppiness from the team this season, and really over the course of Robert Saleh's tenure, but especially in the second half of seasons where it seems like they just once they're out of it, I'm not saying anybody gives up, because I do think their players are trying. Like I don't think anybody would accuse these guys of not trying right now, but the tackling effort has been poor. And just ultimately, like especially on the offensive side of the ball, but ultimately this falls on Robert Saleh, this falls on Nathaniel Hackett, and even Ulbrich to a degree, and Boyer to a degree. Special teams had its moments too. Like the season's over, yes, but like you need to go into the offseason like feeling okay about the structure of this organization and the chemistry and the culture and all that stuff. And they can say all they want at the podium, I think, feel great about it. But if you're winding down the season and you can't get these guys to line up properly, like that reflects very poorly. And I don't see why anyone would believe you can fix it next year just because Aaron Rodgers there. Like Aaron Rodgers doesn't fix all their problems. Everybody can say that all they want, internally, externally, all that stuff. Maybe he can help the offensive line issues. Maybe he can help the wide receiver issues. He cannot help coaching issues, discipline issues, and getting them prepared issues. So they have a lot they need to reflect on. I think Robert Saleh has admitted that to a degree finally. Like I think it took a little bit too long of a time for him to like take accountability at the podium, because this was a couple weeks ago. He blamed, I think it was after the Dolphins game, where he was like blaming everything on the offensive line, and the offensive line was bad, but as a coach, like after a game, you have to put it on yourself. And then the next day you could be like, all right, we watched the film, the offensive line needs to be better, all that stuff. And I think he's struggled with that a little bit. There's a lot of excuse making that goes on in this organization. And so I think everybody, and I think they know this internally, like everybody needs to take a look in the mirror and figure out how they can be better next year, because bringing in Aaron Rodgers does not fix everything. And even when Aaron Rodgers is back, I can't imagine he'll be happy with the way the culture has gone to a degree this year. So I think they have the pieces in place to be good again next year. Like they have the talent, but it's been a very concerning effort. That Washington game arguably would have been even worse than the Browns one, because Washington's a bad team and they almost blew it with some poor effort in the second half. So I'm very curious to see what this Patriots game looks like. You have nothing to lose. Like I hope this week, because usually when they play the Patriots, they all try and pass it off like it doesn't matter, right? I think they should just embrace the crap out of it this week and be like, yeah, we want to beat the crap out of them. We have nothing else going on. We never,
because that's what Belichick's going to do.
Oh yeah, if it's Belichick's last game, Belichick is pulling out all the stops for sure. We'll talk about that later in the week, obviously.
I would say Patriots fans would, if there was ever a time to lose to the Jets, like this is the one.
Oh yeah, but that's the fun. That will be again. This will be. We'll probably hit on this pretty hard later in the week. But the to win or not to win debate this week is. You can see both sides.
If Belichick's not returning to New England, he
doesn't care about the draft.
Yeah, he's not going to care about that. But like, it would be quintessential Jets to lose, and then the Patriots get the next great quarterback for the next 10 years to torture them.
Oh gosh, don't jinx it, Zach.
Fans are talking about this already.
Yeah, I think we've been talking about it since mid-season. Like when it was like when it was clear how bad the Patriots were.
Yeah, there was a moment last week where it seemed like there was still a chance the Jets could finish last in the division, and then the Patriots lost. So it would have been, because everybody kind of assumed the Patriots were going to be in the last, so it would have been pretty perfect Jets stuff for them to still wind up in last. But they have a chance to beat the Patriots and feel a little better going the offseason, and the fans can get mad when the draft comes and the Patriots get their quarterback. But I do think fans would be happy with the win this week. I think that generally I feel like if they won this game, they never beat the Patriots. Like getting that skid off, and so we don't have to ask them about it a million times next year. Like I think everybody would be happy with that. I don't know, but the people in the comments can say what they think. But down the line, obviously, it doesn't bode well. But you can live for this moment for this 1 week. I think.
Yeah, just snap the streak. Like make
it. And their draft
right,
pick, they're pretty locked in. They're pretty locked into the 8th pick too. So like, even if they lose, I think they need a lot to happen to move up. So,
right. All right. Some other kind of news and notes. Dwayne Brown's season is over. We talked about him being a terrible signing. That's kind of the cherry on top of that, I guess, is that he's done. And then Zach, is Zach Wilson's Jets career over?
Yeah. Well, the Dwayne thing, it felt inevitable because he was at a point where they're using him as a jumbo tight end because he like physically couldn't hold up for an entire game because of his like hip injury. Then he added a back injury to it recently. I do wonder if he retires. Knowing him, he probably doesn't want to go out like this, so maybe he tries to catch on somewhere else, or he waits like Jason Peters until somebody needs him during the season. I don't even blame him necessarily. What I blame is the Jets for banking so much, especially coming into this season. Last season, I understood it more. To bank so much coming into this season on a 38-year-old coming off shoulder surgery as your left tackle to block Aaron Rodgers, like that was faulty thinking, and that was one of the more damning things that Joe Douglas did this offseason, frankly, beyond the no backup quarterback thing and the wide receiver too and all the other mistakes they had. But that was just bad. They essentially were relying on Dwayne Brown and Mekhi Becton to anchor their offensive line, and those were two of the riskiest guys on this roster. I don't think they even wanted Mekhi to start initially, but Billy Turner and Max Mitchell are so bad in camp that they had to start Mekhi. And then we saw as the season went on, and Mekhi's, I don't know how Mekhi's doing physically, but he got worse as the season went on. He was a risk anyway because he has barely played the last couple of years, and Dwayne Brown. So ultimately, that's kind of like one of the stories of the season is, it feels like ages ago, but Dwayne Brown was the left tackle in week 1 after he barely played in training camp. I don't think it was his fault, the Aaron Rodgers injury. I think it was more the play call of the cut blocking and all that stuff. And it feels like it was, we can talk all we want, the what ifs, but the idea that Rodgers had made it through this whole season behind this offensive line, I think is faulty logic ultimately. And then week 2.
So what changes this offseason though? Yeah. Like, do they totally revamp everything? Is the O-line coach still there? Like, if that's what they're banking on, that Rodgers being behind that line, like that's a lot to do in one offseason.
Yeah, one that's, and as again, obviously, like when you change an entire offensive line, like that group needs to figure out how to play together too. So there's bumps in the road. So yeah, I think you're going to see them get a new left tackle, a new right tackle, and probably at least one new, if they get rid of Laken Tomlinson, at least one new guard. And then you have to also decide what position you want AVT to play, and he's coming off an Achilles injury. So it's a big
that's a lot.
mark. Maybe that's Joe Tippmann is the only one you can look at and be like, okay, we know he's locked in as our center next year, and they can feel good about that draft pick. Which the rest of the draft, we haven't really seen anything from these guys yet. But yeah, I don't know if they want to bring Laken back, especially at that. He has an $18 million cap hit. AVT, is he a right guard? Is he a left guard? Is he a right tackle? Maybe they make that decision based on what they can get this offseason. They don't have a second round pick, which makes that first round pick especially important. So they use that on, this is a class with like very like talented wide receivers, and there's offensive tackles that there's a few that are rated as like top 10 guys. So you need to decide, like, do you invest your money in free agency in wide receiver or offensive tackle? Because I don't think they can afford like getting an elite guy at both or whatever. So there's a real balance that Joe Douglas, a real fine line he's going to have to follow this year. I would not recommend going after David Bakhtiari, frankly. That feels like what Rodgers would probably push, but that guy hasn't played this year. He's been, I think it might have been ACL. I'm not exactly sure.
He's had like several complications, I think, from that surgery. Yeah.
Yeah. Unless you're bringing him in as a swing tackle, like I don't know that you should be relying on another injury-prone guy. So, and as I mentioned earlier, like the problem with, there's no winning here. So basically the problem with going free agency for like your big investment is that usually, like I said, the guys that hit free agency, there's probably a reason. Like teams don't let great offensive linemen leave. Like that doesn't happen. And then in the draft, if you draft a guy, it's pretty rare for a rookie offensive lineman to be good right away. Like it happens, but it's hard because like those guys haven't adjusted.
Especially at tackle.
At tackle.
Yep.
So like you're banking on either a rookie or, you're spending a lot of money on a veteran, which, if it doesn't work out, then it affects the next GM more than it does Joe Douglas, I guess. But so I mean, the offensive line is going to be the story of this offseason.
I feel like it's every offseason with the Jets.
Yeah, it is.
Crazy.
Yeah, it is. and it has been for a long time.
They
And
keep trying.
How many years have we been doing this podcast?
I mean, the whole story everybody brings up is Joe Douglas promising Sam Darnold's parents that he's going to get an offensive line in front of him to protect him, and he has not done that. And I think we're going to talk to Joe Douglas at some point next week. That's going to be a big topic for conversation, as well with the backup quarterback thing. But yeah, I mean, it's all or nothing on that offensive line this offseason. So I'm very curious to see, it would not shock me if they do a lot of restructures, they clear cap space, and they just go all in on signing a completely new offensive lineman, add some rookies, get a better veteran swing tackle than Billy Turner. Like, they need a plan for the absolute worst, because 2 years in a row they've lost all their offensive linemen every week, it seems like. So you need to go in expecting that to happen again. And if you plan that way, I'm not saying you need 5 starters as the backups, because that's unreasonable, but you need to have a better swing tackle, a better interior backup that can play all 3 spots. You need to fill out the backups a little bit better, and they did not do a good job of that this year, obviously.
All right, I mentioned Zach. We thought we'd see him play out the final few weeks, and obviously the concussion, still in protocols. So it looks like this is the end, and he won't get a last game as Jets quarterback on the field, it feels like.
Yeah, for the first time, initially, Saleh said whenever he's back, he's the quarterback, but he kind of backed off of that a little bit the other day. He pretty much said he'd be in consideration, which is a much different change in tone. So I think they roll with Trevor Siemian again this week. We'll know for sure today. We'll find out if Zach was cleared or if they'll play Coy, and we'll see how he does in practice. He hasn't been cleared of protocol yet, I don't believe. So, yeah, I do get the sense that, this isn't controversial. This is the last we've seen of Zach in the Jets uniform, probably. And this offseason is going to be very interesting, because what can they get for him? I can't imagine it's much. They don't really get much cap savings from even trading him. They just don't lose money. They take a big dead cap penalty. But both sides need to part ways. This is what Robert Saleh. This has been reported by someone other than me, but I know it to be true. Is that Robert Saleh told Zach Wilson that when the season was over, they would trade him. They would find a spot for him. So I think that's the direction everybody's going. I think there's been frustration from both sides about how things have been handled. And now the Jets are going to I would hope they're going to make backup quarterback a big priority. And I know we're going to talk about, there's been a rumor about somebody, but and we can go into some of their other options. But yeah, we've talked pretty much every angle about Zach Wilson and his career here. There's not really much else to say. It obviously was a failure. I do think, especially in that Texans game, he showed when he's at his best what he can do. So I do think there'll be a team that will take him. I'm just very curious to see what team it is and what the Jets can get for him. Maybe a 5th-round pick or something like that. Worse quarterbacks have gone for more. So I'm curious to see where he lands, how it looks. He'll do way better outside of this market. And you hope that he doesn't go to another market like Philly or something. But yeah, I don't know. It's unfortunate, because I was hoping to see if he could replicate that Texans game. And the Dolphins game was a disaster because of the O-line, and he never really got a chance to do it again. But he does have that on tape. So that's a positive thing. So, yeah, I'm very curious to see where he winds up. Well, I'm sure we'll get into options once the season's over.
Yeah, for sure. All right. And you mentioned the rumor came out this week, Justin Fields, that the Jets potentially would be interested in going after Justin Fields as their QB2 behind Aaron Rodgers. Zach, your thoughts?
I mean, it's a ridiculous rumor, frankly. So number one, he would have to be free agent for that to happen, because they're not going to trade a bunch for a guy who has shown to be at least a usable quarterback with some dynamic skills. And second, obviously they would be interested in it if he was available and willing to do that, but that is not going to happen. This guy's a starting quarterback, and there's not as many good starting quarterbacks in the league anymore, and he is one of the 20 best probably. That's where we're at right now. So I thought that was a ridiculous rumor. I wouldn't listen to it. And unless the Jets plan on making him their quarterback in the future, I just don't see that happening. So, but the name I will say that I've heard that the Jets might be pursuing this offseason or would have interest in is Jacoby Brissett. He's played for the Browns last year and this year for Washington. When he played against the Jets, he just does the job. He's exactly what you want out of a backup quarterback. He can run the offense, get rid of the ball quickly. He's a good arm. He can throw it down the field. So I I think he'd be an ideal backup, but I think he's a name to keep an eye on this offseason.
Mobile enough to survive behind the Jets offensive line too.
Yeah, so he's the kind of guy. I don't know what he's going to cost. I'm curious to see what Woody is willing to pay for a backup quarterback this year, especially after all the criticism they got this year. And I know he hears it. I don't think they wanted to pay 3 quarterbacks last year, which is why they didn't really do much. But yeah, there's options. I know Gardner Minshew is a guy this organization has liked quite a bit. He's probably earned a starting job at this point too. So I don't know if he'd take a number 2 with this team, but Brissett I think would be the top target right now if the offseason was starting tomorrow.
All right. What else? Did we miss anything, Zach? Marissa, did I miss anything?
I think it's been a great show.
Happy to have her back.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. Madison is loving just sitting here
down.
listening. You know, it's funny. Every time I talk, she talks. So that's why I've been muting myself after. She can't hear you guys. I'm like, maybe I got to get her some like baby headphones. Or, I just kind of like
she can follow the conversation a little better.
I got to take my AirPods out so she can hear the conversation. She's a big listener. So, but yeah, I mean, big fan of Jacoby Brissett. Think that he is a great teammate too. So if the Jets can land him, although I think he's making $8 million this year, so could be.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be cheap probably, but they'd have to invest in a backup quarterback.
Totally.
Whatever.
And he would be a guy to do it for. So
yeah, I will say one thing that
shall see.
Did Madison leave a 5-star review?
She did actually. Yeah.
Okay, good.
She has lost 1 sock and 2 toys on the floor, but she made sure to leave her 5-star review.
Great. She knows how to use a phone already and everything. It's
yeah.
Future super producer. Right there.
Yes.
But I was going to say last week, Albert Breer had something about the Jets. I think somebody alluded to it here. Where Saleh basically alluded to bringing the whole staff back. I don't think the whole staff will be back. You kind of asked about Keith Carter earlier. I'm curious to see
the O-line.
On one hand, on one hand, the offensive line has been a mess. On the other, 3 offensive line coaches in 3 years is not really a recipe for success either. So that'd be interesting. But yeah, I can't imagine that offensive staff is going to look the same. I would expect some changes there. I don't know who or what. I don't think Nathaniel Hackett will be involved in that change. Okay. But I wouldn't expect.
Could he be involved in the play calling change though?
Doubtful.
I know we've talked about it.
Should he be involved in the change? Yes, but I don't see that happening. And guys like Todd Downing and Keith Carter, those are guys that Robert Saleh pursued and was ecstatic about hiring. So I don't think he'll simply just get rid of them without a fight. So there's other areas I guess they could address, but it's just like painting lipstick on a pig, as they say. Firing a position coach doesn't really change much ultimately. It's the operation that's the issue. So we'll go into the next year, and you hope that Aaron Rodgers can fix all your ails
with some bone broth.
With some bone broth in a coffee cup.
All right, that's going to do it for us. We'll be back on Friday to better preview the Patriots game. I will also try to get on. We're nearing the end of the picks competition, and we have a clear leader right now. So we're going to see if we can get him on as well to talk about that. Should be a good show on Friday. We'll talk to everybody then on the Can't Wait podcast.